My name is Neil Monroe. I'm the director of the Oxford Brookes Poetry Centre, which ran the awards for this year. And it's an honour and a pleasure to welcome you to this virtual awards event. This event is really one of the highlights of our Poetry Centre calendar. And I do hope that you enjoy it. This evening's event is going to be in two parts. Shortly, I'm delighted to say that Fiona Benson, the judge of this year's competition, will give a short reading from her work and say a few words about judging the competition. After this, we will have readings from the winning and commended poets, all six of whom I hope will be here. One of our poets, Onyekachi, Iloh, isn't quite here yet, but we're hoping he's going to join us a little bit later on. I just want to say a few words about the Poetry Centre and the competition for this year. The centre is based within the School of English and Modern Languages at Oxford Brookes University, and it's dedicated to creating research into poetry, encouraging the reading and writing of poetry within Oxford and beyond, and advocating for the importance of poetry in today's society. In addition to running the competition, in recent years, we have organised a series of poetry workshops for military veterans from the US and the UK, and an anthology of that work, which has kind of arisen from those workshops, is freely available on our website. And in 2017, we started a poetry pamphlet press called Ignition Press. And earlier this month, we published actually the most recent 3 of our 14 pamphlets so far. And you can actually find a video of that launch on our YouTube channel. It featured Isabel Baffy, Daniel Fraser and Kostya Tsalakis. And Kostya actually was a previous winner of the EAL category of this competition. The Poetry Centre seeks to be as outward looking as possible, and we strive to make connections between poets in the UK and poets abroad. And that's one of the reasons why we have these 2 categories for the competition, open category and the English as an additional language category. This year, we were especially pleased to see poems that came from many different countries, including a host of places from which we'd never received entries before. In total, the competition received a record number of more than 1,600 entries for 2020 by 740 poets from nearly 60 different countries. So if you entered the competition this year, or have entered the competition in the past, thank you very much indeed. It was a real pleasure to read your work, and we wish you all the very best with your writing. As any writers watching this will know, being included on the shortlist for any competition is a very significant achievement in itself. And as Fiona mentions in her judge's report, there were terrific poems written by the winners, the commended poets, and the shortlisted poets. So I'd like to extend our congratulations to all of the shortlisted poets and recognise them here with apologies for any inaccurate pronunciations. So that's Elena Croitoru, Claire Miranda Roberts, Jonathan Edwards, Janine Bradbury, Kim Moore, Christelle Bamford, Amelia Lully, Katie Byford, who you're going to hear from shortly anyway, Sarah Levy, Ian Walker, Ali Lewis, Michal McCann, Kevin Smith, and Millie Gwil. Congratulations to all of you. It's wonderful to see the enthusiasm for poetry internationally and also the remarkable range of styles, as you'll be able to tell from the readings you're about to hear. You can read all of the winning and commended poems on our website and find details of the shortlisted poets too. So it's now my very great pleasure to introduce our judge for this year, Fiona Benson. Fiona won the Eric Gregory Award in 2006 and was a Faber New Poet in 2009. Her pamphlet, and you can see how much of a fan of Fiona I am because I actually got her pamphlet, here it is, from 2009 was, she was Faber New Poets 1 in the Faber New Poets series. Whilst her debut collection, which is this one, told you I was a fan, here we are, Bright Travellers, won both the Geoffrey Faber Memorial Prize and the Seamus Heaney Centre Prize for first full collection in 2015. Her latest collection, which looks like this, Vertigo and Ghost, was published by Jonathan Cape in 2019, shortlisted for the T.S. Eliot Prize and won the Forward Prize for Best Collection and the Roehampton Prize. If you haven't read one of these collections, I really highly recommend that you do check them out. Christmas is on the way. You could easily add these to your Christmas list. Fiona lives in rural Devon with her husband and 2 daughters and is currently working on a commission of poetry of celebrating insects with the Arts and Culture Department at the University of Exeter. So Fiona, over to you. Thank you very much.
Sorry, it took me a while to work out how to unmute. Hello, it's my very great honour to be here. And first I wanted to thank Neil Monroe and Oxford Brookes and the Oxford Brookes International Poetry Competition. It's been such a privilege and honour to judge this competition and to read all these amazing poems. And I think university support for the arts at the moment is so important, and it was just an amazing thing to read all these poems. And also, you know, such a lot of work goes into these competitions and events, so thank you very much to Niall and the team at Oxford Brookes. These poems came to me in a bit of a lull after submitting a particularly bad manuscript to my editor, and in the middle of all this COVID stuff that we're living through, and they were just a real gift. I was astonished by the quality and the depth and the breadth and the formal experimentation, and yeah, just the wonderful space of empathy and imagination that these poems offered. It reinforced in me a belief in the importance and place of poetry as a place where we can meet in language, even in the difficult times, and speak honestly and musically about what it means to be human, and have empathy with each other, and to have these amazing imaginative spaces. Reading the EAL poems in particular was a very humbling experience. They came from so many different cultures and traditions, and had so much musicality and erudition and different influences feeding into them. And I just felt very blessed to read them and very enriched. I felt they really brought something to the poetry world. That, you know, we can be quite insular, I think, but it felt amazing to have all these different worlds coming in. The poems that I chose, we have Grief as a Man with Many Gifts, which is just a beautiful, driven poem of trauma and love and grief. And it's so rich in imagery and really propelled by language and imagery. It's got this real momentum to it, and it's incredibly beautiful. Mother Won't Know Who Signs Her DNR by Dianty Ningrum. Just such a beautiful poem that uses the rhythms of hospital and of the monitors as a kind of pushing forward and holding back device throughout the poem, and such a reckoning with death and with faith. And it was just a real honor to be in a room with that poem. And then Alexandra Corrin-Tachibana, Wakeboarding in Hamamatsu, which I related to so much. It's this kind of document of social anxiety and awkwardness, and kind of fitting into this wetsuit is very tactile and embarrassing. And I just related to it on so many levels, and I thought it was lovely. And then the open competition also blew me away, from virtuosic, weird retellings of classical myth to anxiety personified as a pangolin, and these poems ran the gamut of human experience from birth to death, with everything in between, and they just seem to provide this rich and thriving poetry scene and tradition, and it was just so wonderful to experience that. So we had Appetit for Persephone by Katie Byford, which is one of the strangest poems, but so eerie and beautiful, and such a wonderful original retelling of the Persephone story. And How to Avoid Clichés by Vanessa Lampert, which was just another story of parental loss, and also of palliative care. There's a palliative care doctor in this poem that seems such a beacon of human kindness. I really loved it. And then what have I done wrong here? I've got my poems mixed up, Alex, I'm sorry. So referenced Alex's wakeboarding in the EAL. I'm sorry, I got mixed up looking at my notes. I get nervous and I get mixed up, sorry. So Alex is in the EAL category, I mean the open category. And in the EAL we had, which I skipped, sorry Milla, my mother asked me how to leave my father, which was heartbreaking, mother's reckoning with divorce and the dogs kind of symbolizing this difficult parting and all the empathy and love in them. Sorry to get that muddled, you two. Sorry, forgive me. Right, so I've been asked to do a short reading. I'm going to keep it short because we want the attention on our stars tonight, the winners of the competition. I'm going to start. I was trying to find poems that related in some way to the poems that I'd been reading as part of the shortlist and of the competition as a whole. And there were a lot of poems about trauma and mental health and children and grandparents and parents. So I decided on my poem Meningitis, which is about my grandmother and the kind of the trauma she experienced. She lost her daughter to meningitis. There's a reference in this poem to a Mickey Mouse gas mask, which was the gas masks that the children had in the Second World War. So they were made to look as if they had a Mickey Mouse snout, which actually made them look very creepy and a bit frightening. But it was thought a good idea at the time. So this is for all those people that wrote beautiful poems of love and loss and trauma and anxiety. Meningitis. My grandmother, diminished in her bones, loyal to her large print mills and Boone and her soaps, bent perpendicular over her Zimmer, weeping, still weeping for her daughter June, who was sweet, so sweet, the child of her heart, soft blonde curls and forget-me-not eyes, gentle and kind. How June took care of the evacuees, holding out their towels as they stepped from the disinfectant bath to be deloused. How, after all that, the world's war and its shell-shocked peace, the Mickey Mouse gas mask packed away at last, June went to bed with half a soluble aspirin for a headache, and by the morning was gone. The way my grandmother tells it, she didn't know there was anything out of the ordinary wrong. And June died in the night, in wet sheets, alone, as the terrible roses bloomed beneath her skin. My grandmother, out of her mind with pain, writhing and kicking on the kitchen linoleum while my uncle, as a boy, watched on. Which is why my father came to be born, to bring her back to the living, a baby to hold. And this is my inheritance, this heirloom of grief. The way my daughter's fevers crush me, how I check their skin obsessively for telltale burns, how I scoop them out of the flames where the devil eats them. Daughter, like a hot poultice, I hold against my frightened heart. The marks I make above my door that the angel of the plague might pass. When my grandmother waits, standing on the threshold in her red velour slippers, unable to step over, peering fearfully into the dark. I'm going to read in honour of all the classical myth retellings we had, I'm going to read one of the Zeus poems. I'm going to read one of the transformations. This is one of the metamorphoses. I'm going to read one I don't read very often, so wish me luck. Transformation, Io. TJD, here is gift to the luminous one. Io, groping down the corridors of the sanatorium, head swinging like a lantern, unsteady legs, like a sick calf in mud, unable to piece together words. Ma, she says, ma. At feeding time, she turns from the spoon, tonguing it bluntly out of her mouth, self-starved. Here it comes. Her pupils dilate, her brain staggers and deviates down telescoping holes, protein folds, spongiform. She is goaded and stung. God manifests in thickening air like a plague, like a locust swarm. He has his dick out. He will tear her with his slimy mouth. He will rip her apart. He is harm. She is smashing her head against the wall. She is screeching at demons. Doctors come running. She is buckled down, drugged calm. Her father weeps, is a river of grief. Her mother stands behind the reinforced glass and will not turn from her daughter's slackening face as it mouths some blurred message of violation, some plea to come home. Do not look for beauty. It is gone. Yet here's her father stroking her hair, her mother looking for a cure, witnessing, insisting on the gentlest care. See how tenacious they are, how truly humans love. And then I'm going to finish with what I think of as a happy one. I also think of it as an embarrassing one. So Alex, your social embarrassment poem, I'm kind of feeling that social embarrassment every time I read this poem. So I'm going to read Ace of Base. Ace of Base. That was the summer. Hormones poured into me like an incredible chemical cocktail into a tall iced glass. My teenage heart, a glossy maraschino cherry bobbing on top as that rainbow shimmered through me, lighting me up like a fish. And I was drunk, obsessed, desperate to be touched. Colour streaming from my iridescent body as the wide summer night threw open its doors and called us into the evening to sit in its love seat and gossip about boys. Though we'd have fucked anyone back then, each other had we dared, right there on the tennis courts. All us unparented girls released from the boarding house to practice our backhand. Desire between us like a shared addiction in its crooked spoon. Desire and the holding back, the terrible restraint. As we listened to the top 40 or our 3 CDs till the batteries ran down, till the asphalt's grit had pressed its intricate red pattern on our thighs, and we talked about who'd done what with whom and how it felt, all of us quickening, and sex wasn't here yet, but it was coming, and we were running towards it. Its gorgeous, euphoric mist, pushing into our own starved bodies at night for relief, like the after calm might last, like there was a deep well of love on the other side. And I can't tell you how much I'm looking forward to hearing everybody read their poems tonight. So thank you so much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Fiona. That was absolutely terrific. It was a real privilege to hear you read those poems. Thank you. Just to give you a little insight into the judging process, as it developed, we encountered a couple of problems that were completely out of our control, nothing to do with us. But Fiona dealt with these with extraordinary patience and good humour. She was really an exemplary judge for the competition. And we couldn't have done any better. We count ourselves tremendously fortunate to have had her as our judge for this year. Judges' reports can sometimes, you may know, be slightly banal pieces of prose, but Fiona's, not Fiona's, read it. It's on the website. If you haven't already read it, it's honest, it's insightful, it's inspiring. Look it up. So thank you so much for all of your work, Fiona, on the competition. And I'm sure the commended and winning poets are pleased too, because they're here and you selected them. And as I said, we're really pleased to have them all here. We're going to start with the EAL category, and I'll invite the specially commended poets to read, and then the poet who was awarded second place, and then the first place poet. As I said, Onyekachi isn't quite here. We're hoping he's going to show up. If he does, then we'll draw him in. We might wait until the end of the sort of event to see if he can join us. If not, then one of us will read his poem on his behalf. So the special commendation in the EAL category goes to Milla van der Haver for her poem, My Mother Asks Me How to Leave My Father. Milla is from the Netherlands and wrote her first poem when she was 16 during a physics class, when presumably she should have been doing physics. She has been writing ever since. Her poetry has been published in Cherry Tree, Otis Nebula, and Ninth Letter, amongst other places. And in 2016, her chapbook, which is called Ghosts of Old Virginie, was published. Milla lives and works in Utrecht in the Netherlands with her wife and 2 rabbits that sometimes appear in her poetry. So Milla, over to you. Please read us your poem.
Thank you so much. And first of all, I want to say that I am immensely honored and grateful to be here. This would have been a highlight in any year, but especially this year where everything feels so ingrown. This is, really, I'm just so grateful to be able to share in poetry. So thank you so much. And about this poem, I came to it from kind of a different angle. I wrote it for a poetry course, and the prompt was to write a poem about when someone invaded your personal space or really overstepped your boundaries. And so this is one of the few poems I have that are based on a true story. And it's called My Mother Asks Me How to Leave My Father. It's about the dogs, she says. She sits and she isn't mother, but helpless nonetheless. A divorce is as much about leaving as it is about what you take with you, what you can carry, and it's the dogs. They need homes. You can't leave dogs, it goes against the soul. So you leash them with soft hands, you direct them into kind-natured killing until whatever you are, whatever even mattered, is that your house has become twilight, a shade of desperation, and they say Cerberus was once a snake coiled around his master's ankles. You see, so many things can be called dogs. Love, for instance, when it's sweaty and pawing your cheek for attention, or when it springs up unawares and catches you in shackles for hands, eager and panting as it spills, like a pomegranate at your feet. Thank you.
Oh, it was wonderful, Milla. Thank you so much. That last image of the pomegranate is so kind of surprising and yet brilliant. So thank you so much. That was great. So in second place in the EAL category is Dianty Ningrum with her poem Mother Won't Know Who Signed Her DNR. Dianty is from Indonesia. She currently resides in Naarm in Melbourne, pursuing a doctoral degree as she is in sustainable development. She was shortlisted in this year's Montreal International Poetry Competition. Her poems are published in The Scores, based at St Andrews in the UK, and the Australian Poetry Anthology, and are forthcoming in an anthology called Borderless, a transnational anthology of feminist poetry published by Recent Work Press and will come out next year. So Dianty, over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Neil. I would also like to thank Oxford Brookes University and the Poetry Centre, also Neil and Claire for organizing the whole thing, also for Fiona for her really amazing words and praise about all of us, and me particularly. I actually jot down my notes in here because if I'm being asked to explain my poem, I would perhaps go rambling quite a bit, so just keep things in pace. So this poem is triggered by the passing of my mother last year and having to sign the DNR, the Do Not Resuscitate order, which for those who do not know, it's an order to not perform a CPR for a person for reasons that could be personal or medical explanations. So in my mother's case, it's a medical complications. And at the time, there were times where, weeks and months after that, there were times where everything just got back to normal and the whole thing was just felt so surreal and like it's a part of my imaginations, and the whole thing was never happened. So not only I wrote a poem about this, I also sent this out to competitions or for publications, so I can no longer be the only one with this memory. So I want another pair of eyes to be the audience of this memory, in order for it to be a collective memory instead of only mine. So mother won't know who signs her DNR. It was God. It was godly of you, hands, to decide what's for the best, what stops collective pain. Throat as dry as that dangling catheter, dry as that slim cold saline pack, which unlike life is about to be replaced. We know only so much warm flesh the earth embrace, only so much pressure her ribs can endure. There is a shame in remembering that I slept well that night. Numbers blinking like Andromeda, numbers swimming on the screen. 60 per 30, 75%. Numbers jumping up, numbers drowning, numbers I keep wanting to go the opposite way. 50 per 20, 43%. This means you're half breathing, mother. This means half of your lung gives up while the other's foolish, poor half lung doesn't know we've settled the score last night. They say the body can't betray itself, yet God can step anywhere without hearing the word betrayal. 40 per 20, 38%. Let's just live. Skip the long beeps, skip the yasin. People flipping your worldly, jiggly remains in a metal desk. The urge that I have to kiss the braces on your chest. On your lower back, a burgundy crust, a gaping dark basin. I mutter a muted Allahu Akbar. God, you are so great. When I say this, it means hypnosis, it means faith. Like patterns, life is being passed on by the dead. A quiet poem flutters in your palm. Like orphans, we... Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dianty. It was wonderful reading, really moving. Thank you. So first place in the EO category is Onyekachi Iloh. And Onyekachi is a writer and a visual artist from Nigeria who believes in art as a weapon of revolution. He's been a third prize winner of the Singapore Poetry Prize and a shortlistee for the Lagos International Poetry Festival Prize. His work has appeared or is forthcoming in Barron Magazine, Singapore Unbound, Blue Marble Review, Welter, Palette Poetry, and elsewhere. He says when he isn't playing guitar or dancing before mirrors, he reads poetry or mourns his country. And you might get a sense of his country in this poem, which, as I say, is the first prize winner of the EAL category, and it's called Grief is a Man with Many Gifts.
Hello Niall, hello Fiona. I'm sorry I couldn't join you guys yesterday. I had network issues, so I couldn't come through. I'm really honored to be so awarded by the Oxford Brookes University. I'm really honored, and it means a lot to me actually. So, to the point. Grief is a man with many gifts. I sleep after I suck out beans and yam and wake up to my great aunt dead. I am 7 or 6 or 5 and I have not yet learned the language of grief or the sound of a body falling into silence. People die within our country, but it is not our country. To some place far away on TV where there are bombs, fire dancing on bodies, school children without desks, and 9 PM news that are about stolen billions, and men in boats saying they tire of drinking oil with water. I already knew the square root of 16 is 4, and that in 67 our people went to war, but had not wandered yet in the ambit of pain. Mourners taught soft songs from their souls with their tongues, and their wails bounced out the walls of my little body and sat at my feet in shards. The crowd waits upon Christ, seeking bread from his hands, then blood from his side. The whisper that I do not cry, that I am dry-eyed, that I do not tear my hair apart for the departing dead. Me, dry driftwood of a miracle, dancing with careless abandon, while the boat swing, arms flailing, tries to rouse God from sleep. I think that moment was when I began to look back at the call of names belonging to another, walk into dreams not mine, and pluck hibiscuses in fields where vultures make the trespassers with a short sign sway. In a hospital in Ibadan, a man clutched to his chest the grief of another man, and his eyes closed to give him a taste of lifelessness. I understand the man fainting at the sight of a headless man's body that left blood in the wake of the stretcher, but I did not know until the doctor ran tests that grief has beautiful intent. Psychic trauma is one of them. A boy I knew would run across the sky every night to harvest a star for every woman he loved, and each of them always left with a part of him in a handbag or on her, just between her hair and her weave, until he gave the only part of him left to a rope dangling from a ceiling fan, stardust spilling from his mouth, and each swing said something like grief has many ropes, and one of them is heartbreak. But I am not sure. The cops cornered off the area. Do not cross. But grief is a borderless country to which you can get trafficked, into which you can wander, and as you drive on, you won't notice the signs. Trespassers will get shot, no stopping, welcome. Because you are too happy to know you've been here before, too amnesic to remember that grief is a man of many garbs, and one of them is joy. Thank you.
So thank you, Onyekachi, for that really extraordinary poem. And thank you, Fiona, for selecting it and for selecting all of these poems. Onto the open category. The special commendation was awarded to Alexandra Corrin-Tachibana for her poem Wakeboarding in Hamamatsu. Alexandra lived in Japan for 10 years and has master's degrees in writing poetry and in Japanese. This year she was commended in the Winchester Poetry Prize and in the Buzzwords competition, and shortlisted by Billy Collins for the Fish Prize. Her most recent work appears in The Moth, Fenland Poetry Journal, Artemis, Tears in the Fence, and Orbis, and online in Anthropocene. She enjoys performing her poems and read a sequence of Japan-themed poems at the 2019 AWP Conference for Writers in Portland, Oregon. She lives in Newcastle upon Tyne, and she teaches there an international foundation program in humanities. So, Alexandra, over to you.
Thanks very much, Neil. And I'd like to begin by saying I'm really chuffed to be here. Thank you very much to Neil and Claire for having me, and to everybody at the Oxford Brookes Centre. And thank you, of course, to Fiona for having me in your lineup and for the lovely comments earlier on. So just to put my poem into context a little bit. So Wakeboarding in Hamamatsu is part of a sequence of poems I've been writing about living in Japan for 10 years. During my 20s and early 30s, I went out there to teach, And my poems are sort of exploring my interactions in that culture, my relationships with the people I met there, from the perspective of a gaijin. Gaijin is Japanese slang for foreigner, and gaijin, the kanji, literally means outside person. Wakeboarding in Hamamatsu. You zip me into a pink and white wetsuit, squashing my boobs that fitted Saiichi's ex, half American and 173 centimeters tall. You cup my head. It's smaller than a Japanese. How young I look in my summer cap. You attach me to a board, pull me by a cord behind your jet ski. I weigh more than the 45 kilos of a Japanese lady, struggle to balance. Your friends applaud as I plummet into the Hamamatsu River. How lucky they found me a wetsuit. We drink Asahi, eat mackerel round a disposable barbecue. Sister-in-law, Machiko, tells a story about your ex, her friend, a high school teacher, who she says was kawaii, pretty. She knows I understand. Cleaning up after lunch is a group activity, but there are too many hands. I'm left to observe, bowing, thanking each other for taking care of one another. People are hesitant to leave first, bow again, say sumimasen, thank you, sorry, apologies. Even though we're in Crocs and shorts, have peed in the estuary and peeled off sodden wetsuits so awkwardly behind car doors. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Alexandra. It was terrific. One of the things to note about Alexandra's poem is, if you haven't already seen it, do look it up on the website, because it has this wonderful shape to it. It's back and forward across the screen or across the page, kind of, I guess, kind of simulating this kind of sense of the kind of flow of the water. So thank you very much indeed. So in second place in the open category is Vanessa Lampert with her poem How to Avoid Clichés. Vanessa actually was a student at Oxford Brookes, which we didn't know, in the days, she says, of microfiche, student grants, and phones tethered to walls in drafty hallways. Beer, she says, was 97p a pint. Things indeed have changed. She is delighted and honoured to return zoomishly with grey hair, she says. Vanessa has an MA in writing poetry from Newcastle University and works as an acupuncturist. She co-edits the online and print poetry magazine, The Alchemy Spoon, which I recommend you check out. It's a new publication. In 2020, she won the Cafe Writers and Ver prizes and came second in the Fish Prize. Her first pamphlet, which is called On Long Loan, was published by Live Canon in October 2020. Vanessa, over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And thanks so much, Claire and Niall, again, for all the things that you do behind the scenes to make this happen. And I was really thrilled to be chosen in a prize that is about kind of 15 minutes drive away from where I live. So, and Fiona, thank you very much. It's a really wonderful thing that for me that you chose my poem for second prize. Thank you. My poem is a slightly complicated poem, and it stemmed from me thinking about how death, when we talk about death and dying, it's so often riddled with cliches. We don't really, it's a painful thing to talk about, and so we say things like the birds sang their hearts out, and I was so I started writing down what actually happened when I was with my father a lot near the end of his life, and I started by writing exactly what happened. And there was this doctor in the green jumper that I mentioned in the poem, and I have a photograph of her in my mind, but I wanted somehow to show that photograph to other people, and the only way that I could do that was with words. So this is my poem. How to avoid clichés. Listen to the others, then say words linked for other reasons. Practice makes enough. Clichés ride on thermals like strains of the song. You've got to search for the hero inside yourself. Learn to duck and leave. In your mind's ear, go to the hospice where your dad stayed for respite. Then curtains, not curtains, he died. Don't say angels, every last one of those people, peaceful. Don't say the birds sang their hearts out, lovely garden, fragrant pink roses, or he had new pajamas, buttoned all the way like a little boy. Say you watched a plane fly over and imagined it packed with divorced guinea pig enthusiasts heading somewhere wet. Say they wore gaiters and read badly written blockbusters with stabbings they won't have seen coming. Say there was a doctor in a green jumper, so thin you could see her bra, and she was crouching beside your dad's bed. Say she was pregnant, but you couldn't tell until she stood up, which happened after she had recited a list of possible happinesses for your dad in a soft voice, while stroking his forearm slowly. Say his pajama sleeve was rolled up past the elbow and the palm of his hand was upturned, reminding you of a clean ashtray or Christ. Say she stroked up his arm, asking, would you like to play Scrabble? Then down, or do the Sudoku together. Fancy a baguette with ham and a sliced tomato. Wagner's Ring Cycle on headphones, or maybe you'd like a whiskey with ice. Don't say, if your own children turn out half as kind as the people who work in hospices, yours will have been a life well lived, job done. Or that you miss your dad more than ever all these years on. Say he chose a whiskey and some pork scratchings. Say the pregnant doctor poured him a treble. Don't call the ice rocks.
It was wonderful. Thank you so much, Vanessa. It's another really wonderfully moving poem. Thank you. Finally, in this category, in first place in the open category is Katie Byford. Her winning poem is called Appetit for Persephone. Katie is a poet and a filmmaker living in London. She's a commended foil young poet and a former Barbican young poet. Her poems have been published in Magma, Pop Shot and Modern Poetry in Translation, and in anthologies from Macmillan and Blood Axe Books. Katie's a classics graduate and has delivered guest lectures for her old department at Durham University on the use of ancient sources in her work. Katie, over to you.
Thank you so much for that. It's been such a privilege to be a part of all of this. Very well read to the other poets, such wonderful poems. And thanks, of course, to Fiona. I think I speak for everyone when I say the words that you've said about our poems we will remember forever. I'm thrilled to be called strange. I think the the stranger the better, in my view. I kind of my poem maybe requires a bit more of an introduction, so I tried to narrow it down as much as possible, but forgive me if it feels like I'm going on a little bit. It's about Persephone, first of all, who was the goddess of spring in ancient Greece, and her mother was Demeter, who was the goddess of the harvest and fruit and, you know, all things crops and ripeness. And it's the specific myth is the rape of Persephone. It's known as that. That literally means the abduction of Persephone, but obviously there is a duality in that. And essentially Hades is promised Persephone as a wife without her knowing, and Persephone is a girl. Her other name is Maiden, so she's stolen from the earth quite literally, and her mother Demeter is looking around for her. She doesn't know where she is, and for 10 days all the crops on the earth die, shrivel up, and mankind start dying, and so Persephone is returned, but before this happens, she's tricked by Hades into eating a pomegranate seed, or a number of pomegranate seeds, depending on the tradition. And if you consume anything in the underworld, you have to have some part of you stay there. So for a third of the year, Persephone has to spend her time in the underworld with Hades. And that means that whenever she goes, Demeter, her mother, is in mourning again. Crops, you know, stop growing, everything stops growing, winter happens. So just a little recap of the myth for anyone who's not familiar with it. But I wanted to write about this myth for so long because, I don't know, it's one of the oldest myths, and it's so foundational in some ways. It's one of the first ones we find out about, weirdly, if we're children. And but I kept on coming up against this wall of the cyclical nature of the trauma that occurs and the abuse that occurs, and the fact that it's portrayed as kind of this natural part of life and the seasons. And I think as soon as I gave myself permission to ignore that completely and to change the narrative, things became a lot clearer. So the only thing left to say is that the title and the first line are both taken from Chaucer's The Wife of Bath. So I'm sorry for any of the terrible pronunciation. I'm definitely not a Chaucer scholar. So this is Appetit for Persephone. Bet is to be wedded than to Bryn. He said I was a peach. Couldn't see him, didn't know the crocus pollen on my toes would be a dowry. Black earth gulped my legs, my shoulders, covered my head, my footprints with itself. The taste of aquifers, stone forests, mantle. I am dead, I reasoned. Through dusted lashes knelt somewhere, head bowed. Informed I am to be comfort for a mud king with strange pets. I gripped a grass blade, still bright with my own kissed breath. There was a wedding of sorts. My stomach and other parts surveyed to fathom my capacity. Hung from my feet to siphon sunlight. Blood pressed for foxglove poisons, panned for gold molecules. Then began the drinking. A feast of carrion. The maltworm king crowed his huge knowledge of human weakness. How fitting you are mine, he cracked, for the price of your hunger. How fitting he, the corpse lord, mistook silence for surrender, and half sober, stirs face down on his throne mound bound under my foot, my heel in grey cheek flesh. And at my word forfeits all but everything of his, even the dogs. Thank you so much.
Fantastic. What a great reading, Katie. That was really wonderful. Thank you very much indeed. Many congratulations to all of the shortlisted, commended and winning poets. Thank you very much to all of the poets who read so beautifully. And huge thanks once again to Fiona. If you don't already follow us on Facebook, Twitter or Instagram, please do track us down there. You can also sign up for our weekly poem, where we send out a poem from small presses usually every Monday, roughly. We're at Brookes Poetry, BROOKES Poetry on social media. Many, many thanks to all of you who have tuned in this evening. I hope you've enjoyed the event. Take care of yourselves and goodbye.